There we go. Everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Thijs, and today we're going to talk about customer service automation. I'm a technical consulting manager at Cognigy. We're a conversational AI vendor, and I don't want to talk about the platform. I want to talk about some of the use cases and customer service automation in general, how to get started with it. So if we look at the table of contents for today, we're going to have a look at what we want to automate, right? Obviously, customer service is broad. There's a lot of channels. There's social media. There's phone. We also want to look at what the potential impact is. So if we pick one of those channels, what would an ROI look like? And lastly, or not lastly, but we then actually want to hear what it sounds like. So we want to call a voice bot, and I am going to call a voice bot in this webinar so that we can listen to it and hear what it sounds like for ourselves. Then the question is, what do you need as an organization in order to get started with this, right? You need the right people for it, you need the right know-how. So we're gonna briefly touch upon the roles that are required for a project like this. And then finally, I wanna present a reference case and talk a bit about that. So that's the overall content for today's webinar. Let's get started. If we look at customer service throughout the years, we see that, I mean, it's been a while, but a lot has changed, right? We see that back in the 1880s, Coca-Cola was the first company that started with discount coupons, right? Everything based on mail, post, took very, very long. Of course, in the meantime, or after that, the telegraph became popular, but it wasn't until the 1960s that that so-called PABX technology, right? So automated call distribution allowed companies to actually set up what we now call a hotline or a call center, right? So this was the time when the first call center started to pop up. Of course, then in the 90s we had email, and I think all of us on this webinar right now, we probably experienced this. We also know that email came really fast. If you look at Hotmail, AOL, right, Outlook, all of this happened in the time span of 1 or 2 years, right? They all started popping up at the same time, and it's still in use, of course. Now, from this internet boom at around the 2000s, this is where the portals came up, the search portals, right? And this is where the MSNs and everything, and this is where companies up until this day still have the concept of a portal where you can log on to your provider, maybe get an invoice, maybe look at some of the, maybe look at some FAQs. So there's definitely an online service portal as a channel that is really, really popular nowadays still. And then more recently, we had chat. Chat can be Messenger, can be Facebook Messenger, it can be something like WhatsApp. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it can also be live chat on a website. Now, if you were to, invest into customer service right now, and of course you look at automation, but where would you invest? Which channel? If we look at the effectiveness of these channels that we see here, you see that telephone is still really, really effective. You have the authentication solved. You can actually talk to someone, right? You can very, very clearly ask the user to express something. The customer can very clearly express what he or she wants. Email is a bit more tricky, especially authentication. You're not going to send someone an email sending back, hey, could you send me your zip code? And then 2 days later answering. That's not so great. Portals are somewhat effective, but people still need to look for information a lot. And chat is actually a nice blend. It's real time. You talk to a human, and it's actually fairly accurate. You don't have the voice, so it's slightly harder to express, but it is a nice combination. If we look at the cost involved, right, we see that there's a huge difference. Portals can be scaled drastically. It's amazing. You have one portal, they apply to all your customers, you give them a user account. But telephony, even though it's really, really effective, is still really, really expensive. So let's just keep this in mind for the rest of the webinar. The problem is that customers actually really prefer telephone, right? This is what people want. Most people do look at portals, right? So 40% of people that call a hotline, they look at FAQs, they try to find the information online, right? But they end up calling the hotline anyhow. This is for the United States, and this is from 2018. A lot has changed in the last 3 years. Keep that in mind. If we look at Germany, for example, as a country, it looks even different, right? Chat is less popular. Telephone is even more popular here. So what we can switch back here. Yeah, what we see here is that there is a huge difference in terms of popularity per channel, and there's a very stark difference in terms of effectiveness and investment required. And now this is changing, of course. because we now have messaging, right? We now have the WhatsApps that allow you to provide customer service in a very, very personalized way, right? Because you're literally in the pocket of people. No one's really downloading a branded app anymore. People are on the messaging channel. So this is what we expect will change in the coming 3 years. This is already in effect if we compare it, back to 2018. What can you do with messenger apps? Well, if you take WhatsApp, for example, it's actually quite broad, right? You can send image attachments, you can send URLs to payment providers, for example. You can present different options. So there's a lot of options with a messaging channel like WhatsApp. The cool thing, though, is that this does not require custom development, right? There's all the elements that are supported by the channel out of the box. And this, of course, also goes for Telegram, for WeChat in China, right? For Kakao in Korea. So there's a lot of channels that you can, a lot of people that you can service if you would go on these messenger channels. Now, what do these channels have in common, right? So we see that email and portals, they are, they're there and they're good, they're useful, but they're not necessarily awesome for what we want. If we look at these 3 channels, and they're broad channels, right? Messaging is really broad, of course. There's one thing that they have in common, right? So if we take a moment to think about what these things have in common, they are conversational, right? It means that unlike email, where you get a reply in 2 or 3 days, right? Live chat or phone is instant. And the same for Messenger. Messenger can take a bit longer, right? But you still expect to have some sort of real-time conversation. And the advantage is that it's not only instant, it is also natural. People are used to, expressing themselves through natural language, right? And lastly, these channels are intuitive. People have been using the phone for many, many years, for decades even, right? We saw it at the beginning. The first call centers popped up in the 60s. Messenger apps as well, they haven't been using them for decades, but messenger apps are everywhere. Everyone is on WhatsApp. We're talking billions and billions of people, right? So you don't need to conquer a new channel. You don't need people to download your app in a app marketplace where there's 10,000 new apps per day. Just go to the channel where they are, right? Which is the messaging app. So if we look back, however, to the first channel that we talked about, that was the telephone. And the telephone is really interesting because it is still a really, really, really popular channel, right? We looked at the States at the beginning, and then we looked at Germany. And in Germany, 57% of people, at least in 2018, which is not that long ago, still prefer to use the telephone as a channel. And I mean, honestly, this is what I guess most of us still do as well. If you really have a question about your invoice, you may check out an FAQ. But in the end, you do end up picking up the phone in order to, to get your question across or to maybe get your complaint across. Now, this is a customer case where they have 3.2 million calls per year in their call center, right? These are just some metrics that we can use to calculate with, because we now want to have a look at the impact of potential automation on one of these channels. So there's a cost of 8.8 million a year for 3.2 million calls per year. So we're at $2.75 cost per call, right? With an average handling time of 330 seconds, so 5.5 minutes. And this 2.75 is rather conservative. There are definitely hotlines where a call costs more. You have a lot of overhead, you have office space, you have training, and all of that included. So in order to understand what can be automated here, let's have a look at the anatomy of a service call, right? So we have those 330 seconds to spend, right, in a call. And what happens here? Well, the first 15 seconds typically goes to routing. It is about, you call the hotline and you need to go through some sort of IVR, right? Because you want to understand or you want to find the right person to talk to, or actually it's the other way around, right? The company wants to route you to the right service person to talk to, right? So this 15 seconds spent there. Now, then there's 30 seconds on top of that, which is what we call ID&V, right? It's identification and verification. So this is where you have a customer that maybe has a question about his or her invoice, and in order to be able to answer that question, you first need to authenticate this person. This can be done by asking for data. Right? You could ask a user for their zip code, for example, maybe a date of birth, or maybe something random, right? Maybe a customer number. You could also do it by sending an SMS message, right? So a form of two-factor authentication. That definitely is an option, and that can definitely work. So once that has progressed, right, you come to the actual call, right? And the actual call is then the remainder 285 seconds of this average 330 seconds handling time of a call. Now, we talk about automation of this channel, of the phone channel, right? We had more channels at the beginning. We'll talk about them in a bit. If we talk about the voice channel, the phone channel, the first thing that we can optimize is routing, right? You could, of course, have an IVR there. Everyone knows an IVR, but you could also put a voice bot there that simply asks, hey, what is it that you're calling for? And maybe the only thing that the voice bot does says, okay, thank you for that. I'll redirect you to the right person, right? We could have an intent mapping there, some machine learning that understands the user's request, natural language processing, and then routes it to the right person. If we do that, and if we're able to shave off 15 seconds of the 330 average handling time, that would save us, with this type of volume, would save us almost $500,000 per year, right? That's just 15 seconds. The second step, of course, is the identification and verification. This is where you would have the bot ask the user for some data. Or maybe the bot sends the user, as mentioned, right? Maybe the bot sends the user a text message that the user then receives a code on, and maybe the user receives this code. Or maybe you say, well, the user calls with the mobile phone, we have the number, we're going to send a code to his or her email in order to cross-validate this, right? There's a lot of options, but the point is having this ID and V process automated would shave off another 30 seconds of the 330-second average handling time of a call. And that leaves us with the third option, and that is, what if we would automate the entire call by having a voice bot here, right? So again, with this volume, if we were to, let's say, automate 20% of this volume of these calls, then that would save a lot of money, right? And you would maybe only do it for 20%. Maybe you don't want all cases handled by a voice bot. That's perfectly fine, right? You could also say, well, maybe the bot only answers some FAQs, and if the question is not a frequently asked question, how do I reset my password? Then we just redirect to a human. This whole process can be very fluent. This is not a one way or the other. This can be a hybrid approach, and it typically is a hybrid approach with the customer projects that we see. So what does it sound like? I prepared a little demo, right? So I prepared a very small voice bot that we can actually call here on, or that I can actually call on my phone. So this is a voice bot that we build in the software, and we literally expose it to the phone network, right? So it has a phone number that I can call, and I'll call it right now. And the idea is to just give you an impression of what a bot like this sounds like, right? It sounds like a robot to some extent, but it is quite fluent. And of course, there's always questions associated that say, like, well, do we want the user to hear that this is a robot, right, and not a human? And the answer is maybe yes. There's a lot of stuff, with voices that you can do. For example, you can do stuff with accents. So keep that in mind. I'll just give this bot a quick call, and then we'll listen to what it sounds like.
Hi, and welcome to the webinar bot. What can I do for you today?
Hey, so what is the status of my order?
Okay, I can help you with that. Could you give me your zip code, please?
Yeah, that's 40479.
Thanks. Is this about order number AB5132?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, hold on. So I see that your order is on its way. It will be delivered this afternoon between 5 and 6 p.m. Is there anything else I can help you with?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Have a nice day.
You too. So just to give you an impression, right? This is a voice bot. It's a simple example, but it is a full end-to-end example, and that brings us to the next topic. If we look at the platform that is needed for this, right? The infrastructure that you have here. Obviously, we need something that can actually talk to all of the channels that we talked about. This demo was using a voice bot, right? But we also want to, I mean, if we're going to invest in this technology, it better be, capable to answer something on WhatsApp as well, right? Because it's essentially the same thing. It is essentially real-time communication. So what happens is, if I call this bot on the phone, then first of all, there's a transcription from voice to text happening. And then this text is being analyzed using what we call a natural language understanding engine. And that's essentially taking into account the meaning of words, but also the meaning of the full sentence. And obviously, this is very language specific, right? The next step is that we need to have some sort of flow orchestration. We need to, teach the bot how it should answer in different situations. The last thing we want is that it comes up with a completely, random answer by itself. We do want to have some guidance in the system for the bot, so that it comes up with useful answers. And it can actually only really come up with useful answers if we integrate this into our backend systems, right? So what we ideally want to do is call the bot or reach out to the bot via WhatsApp or Messenger or any other channel, right? And have it understand our request. So we need it to understand what we want to do. And it then needs to actually do something in the backend system. Maybe it needs to check Salesforce for a ticket status, right? Or maybe it needs to check SAP for an order status. So this technology here in the middle is actually more of an orchestration layer that we have. It also needs to be able to escalate the call to a human agent in case the bot is not able to help me as a customer, right? And the same for live chat. So if we continue to the next slide, yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. The question now is, what do we need for this? Like, how do we approach this? Well, of course, you need people that know how this works, right? The platform that we have in place for this, so all of the channel adapters, it's a low code platform, right? So it's very easy to use. You can create your output with what you see is what you get. You can create your own widgets for channels, and you can debug it, right? You have some training element in it, but you do need people that invest time in this, right? You don't necessarily need a full team of technical experts. It would help to have someone on the team that knows how the backend systems work, because if you want to have a fully transactional bot, as we learned, you need it to integrate with something like Salesforce or SAP, right? So you need people that understand how that works. But the majority of time will be spent teaching the bot how it should react to people, right? And that's what we have, what we call an AI trainer, right? Which is typically a subject matter expert. Someone that understands the customer service process, not necessarily someone that is a data scientist, right? You also need someone that is a conversational expert. Maybe you want to tweak the bot a bit. Maybe it should say, hey, good morning, if someone calls in the morning. Maybe it should, have some small talk attached in case people ask, hey, how old are you, So all of these roles are important in order to make a project like this succeed. And it's often a misconception. People always think, okay, we need to have a huge team of technical experts. Not in our experience, right? You need a very, very diverse team of specialists from different fields. Let's finally have a look at a reference case here. So one of our customers is Lufthansa, right? And Lufthansa obviously has a lot of brands like Eurowings and Swiss. And what they started with as a first entry is with a service chatbot on the website, right? So what you see here is a bot that can answer questions related about flight status, for example. And the cool thing here are the widgets that we talked about with WhatsApp as well, right? So you have a direct output. This is integrated with a backend system. It can actually talk to a backend system and check an actual flight status. So it's not just a bot with frequently asked questions, but it's a fully transactional bot that is integrated with backend systems. And this is what most brands start with. They start with a bot on the website, right? And then they use the same platform, Cognigy.ai, to use the same bots and the same intelligence that's gathered there, the same machine learning, to deploy it on other channels, like the voice channel that we saw a demo of as well. All right, that's it for me today in terms of slides. I see that we have some questions, and I'll actually look at my device here to see what the. Okay, there's a first question from Yusuf, and the question is, what channels are more difficult to get started with? And the answer to that question is Well, it kind of depends on your use case. It kind of depends on what you want to do use it. Right. So if you say, hey, I want to have a phone bot that only detects what the user wants and then redirects it to a human colleague, that's a really easy use case to get started with. However, if you say, hey, we don't want to integrate with our contact center from the get-go, we want to, maybe start with something that's a bit more visual and easier to integrate into our website, then a web chat is a very common typical channel to get started with. Difficulty really depends on what you want to do with the bot, but in general, I would say a web chat and voice are pretty straightforward cases. Yeah, pretty straightforward channels. Another question from Shanika. Do companies have these roles that you mentioned in-house, or do they hire it externally? Yeah, great question. The answer is it depends. We work with some brands, like, for example, Lufthansa that we just saw, right, that have an internal center of excellence. So what that basically means is that they have their own specialist for this whole field, right, of conversational AI, and they offer their own support as well within the firm. So you have different business departments, maybe something like marketing or HR, and they request support from an internal center of excellence. We also have many companies that hire outside expertise, right? So you sometimes have integrators involved with projects. Could be a Deloitte or an Accenture or a KPMG or a CGI. Could also be a smaller agency, for example, that supports there. So it really depends. You can definitely get started with use cases with very little expertise, right? It's very low code, as mentioned. But you typically do want to add more resources if you want to roll this out globally across multiple brands, across multiple locales and languages. Question from Andrew: do you have any example of nonprofit organizations using this as well? Yeah, I think we do. So what we, for example, have is here in Germany. So we're based in Düsseldorf, headquartered in Düsseldorf. We're also in San Francisco and Sydney. But what we have here regionally in Germany, for example, is the government, so the local government of what is it, North Rhine-Westphalia, right? Using this as well, the technology in order to automate service requests, for example, and internal processes. So the answer is definitely yes. One from Mattel: how much extra effort is voice versus chat? Don't you need to train custom models for that? The answer is yes, but it depends. So what we heard, this voice bot that we heard just now in the session today, was not trained using a custom voice model, right? It understood me out of the box. But then again, my service request was very generic. I asked for an order status. Sometimes you have very specific products. Maybe you're a retailer, right, or a manufacturer. You have very specific product names, for example. In that case, you would want to train a custom model. You would add a lexicon and add some examples of that and say, hey, if someone pronounces a certain product name, then this is the transcription in text, and then the AI gets smarter and learns to understand how to interpret that. Yeah. Okay. Another one from Corey: what are typical realistic ROIs? Also really depends on the use case. Not all use cases have clear ROIs, right? We do have plenty of customers and brands that say, hey, we just want to offer a better service. We invest in technology like this without seeing a clear ROI, but we expect one in the longer term. However, most companies that start with a voice use case have a very clear ROI in mind, as we learned from the slides, right? So we can say, okay, we shave off 10, 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds of the average handling time. That has a very clear ROI, obviously, in the contact center. Yeah. All right, let's have a look. There is one from Hannah: should all of this be in one platform, or should I invest in solutions that do one thing really well? Okay, so this is kind of the best of breed versus one platform. So I would say that for certain components, like natural language understanding, right, like a speech to text, you want to have the option to swap them out, right? So you want to say, hey, I don't know, Microsoft or maybe IBM have really good speech to text or text to speech models with very natural voices, or maybe Google has or Amazon has, right? You want to be able to swap those based on your use case. the platform itself, so when you bring everything together, where you have the user interface where all of your people work with those different components, that's probably something that that I would consolidate. And of course, I come from a conversational AI vendor, but that is what we see with customers, right? They start with individual chatbot frameworks, and then they do something with Amazon Alexa, and then they go, wow, actually, we want to have this capability on the other channel, and now we can't, right? Because we have different coding frameworks. So the answer is, it depends on the component. I would say for the overall platform, you definitely want to have a single user interface, so a consolidated approach that that fits quite well with a center of excellence, you know, enterprise-wide rollout. That's how you can actually leverage, you know, the capabilities of a bot like this, because we called it today on the phone. We could also release it on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, right? And then you have the economies of scale that make sense there. Now, let's see. There's one more. No. Okay, I think that's it for the questions. So there's a handout that you can download. It's attached to the webinar. It's a PDF. It has some more background information. It has, I think, the same ROI case that I showed today in the webinar. My contact data is on the screen. If you want to try this yourself, because we did not look at the platform today, right? I promised you that this is all very low code and visual. You can actually try that for yourself by going to cognigy.com/start. And registering, and then you have access to the platform and you can build your own automations. If you have questions, technical questions, if you want to learn more about customers or use cases, feel free to reach out to me either by email or by phone or LinkedIn, and yeah, I'll be happy to give you a tour. Thank you very much and have a nice day.